I fully expect Gunko to try and direct Zoro with the arrows just for him to turn around and go in a completely different direction. This may be the best comment I've ever read on this channel. In a weird world where there's a natural counter to each and every single ability, like Luffy's rubber, Twin L's lightning, or Usopp's self-doubt to Perona's negativity, I can absolutely see Zoro being Gunko's natural counter and giving us that much-awaited third NL face in the series. And what might end up happening here is actually a bit of a course correction. Gunko tries to make Zoro go the wrong way with the arrows, but Zoro's poor sense of direction defies this and makes him go the right way for the first time in his life. The way Loki said, "Looks like I'm gonna lose this round," I read as Loki having future sight. Okay, yeah, there have been a couple of potential Loki future sight hints, although I don't know if you need future sight to see how this conflict was gonna end. I think Loki knew as soon as Luffy called out his attack that it was over, because it didn't matter what that attack was. Loki's bluff was called, as Loki was using everything he had just to stay standing, so even a gentle breeze would have toppled him. Calling it now, Usopp's dream to become a great warrior will temporarily become a reality thanks to the Dream Fruit, and he will defeat the God Knight. So this chapter was extremely important because it established that killing him doesn't just have a nightmare power, it is a dream ability in general. And aside from Luffy, there is no one on this planet with a more active imagination than Usopp. In fact, I think that Usopp's imagination could even surpass Luffy. He just doesn't have the will or magical fruit mechanism to bring a lot of it to life. So here's a cool idea. What if Elbaf ends up being saved by Usopp's lies? It doesn't matter if they don't exist, so long as Usopp can conjure a strong enough mental image, which I believe that he can, of anything. Because given that Usopp spends most of his time living in his imagination, I think that what comes out of there could be more powerful than pulling dreams from anyone else. I mean, just think about the salt. Killing him was very impressed because Summers was thinking of a very specific kind of salt. It took a very precise mental intent to conjure. And if Usopp was to get a hold of this ability in a situation best described as somehow, then he could bring every lie he's ever told into reality. Perhaps even including a dream version of himself to save everyone, an actual god Usopp. Because again, look, I'm happy to box Usopp or face him in any kind of physical close combat, but in a battle of imagination, this man is Kaido. I really do not think that Usopp can be beaten in that realm. Of course, a lot of this could be very classic One Piece cope. There was a lot of this sort of talk happening on Egghead Island with Frankie. Each and every week we were coming up with more new ideas for Frankie to eventually have his big moment. And I guess that's a thing to keep in mind about Killingham's Devil Fruit, as insane as it is. It has effectively infinite potential. So much so that Eiichiro Oda could spend the remainder of One Piece just exploring this fruit alone and still never come anywhere near close to comprehensively exploring everything it can do. But there's a couple of other very important things about Killingham's fruit that this chapter tells us. One is the pretty bleak idea that these dreams won't disappear if the dreamer wakes up, because the salt didn't vanish after Saint Summers woke up, meaning that even if we do manage to free the kids and wake them up, these nightmare creatures are still going to be there and they're going to need to be dealt with in another way. I guess the cop-out answer would be to knock out Killingham and get rid of the powers that way. I don't know if that works though, because Killingham did fall asleep in the previous chapter and the nightmare creatures were still there. Then again, there is a difference in shonen between sleeping and knocked out. Either way, I hope that's not the way it goes. But the mechanics of the fruit also show us that the dreamer needs to be thinking of the conjured object right before being put to sleep, which may add a bit more substance to the Ange is a traitor theory, very conveniently having all of the kids draw their greatest fears right at the time that the Holy Knights needed those fears the most. And to get slightly more conspiratorial, because it's very fun, the stronger the love one has, the more that St. Summers' thorns will harm you, which is why Saul and the PE teacher, Mr. Wolf, got hurt. But then you have Ange over here in this panel very clearly handling one of the kids and not being harmed in any way whatsoever. It might just be because the thorns only take effect when the children are put face up in march mode, or it could be because she's a disgusting, soulless, heartless traitor. At the very least, it is gross negligence of a teacher, and an internal investigation should be conducted into the classroom practices of Ange. And this is an interaction that I don't think will ever happen, or if it does, maybe not on Elbaf, but a pretty hard counter to St. Killingham would probably be Blackbeard, because look, rumor has it, it's going around the One Piece world, that this man does not sleep and does not dream. And you know what? Let's forget that second part for a bit, which would mean that Killingham can't pull anything out because there's no dreams. No, we have a more basic problem than that, because Killingham couldn't even use the initial ability of sending Blackbeard to sleep to begin with, which is a very underrated part of this fruit, by the way. A devil fruit that just puts people to sleep would be pretty damn strong on its own, just not against a certain someone. But you are not a certain someone, and so you have the ability to fall asleep whilst watching the Calm Belt, which is a channel currently undertaking the project of re-editing the Grand Line Review video library into themed compilations. Very long videos perfect for your very long form activities like driving, drawing, gaming, sleeping, whatever it is you do for extended periods of time, we've got you covered for as long as it takes, with no need to pause what you're doing and pick a new video every 15 minutes or so. They're not just compilations either, because throughout the years there have been what I refer to as lost videos, and these are Grand Line Review projects that were fully written, recorded, and edited. However, for various different reasons, were never published. I'm not going to tell you where they are, how many there are, or even what they are though, because that's not really in the spirit of One Piece, is it? My videos, well, they're yours if you want them. I left everything I own in the link in the description. So if this new long form channel meets your needs, then please do check it out and make sure to subscribe, because that is insanely important for small channels, and I look forward to seeing you there. But for now, let's get back to you, me. Thanks, me. Didn't Uta also have the same dream fruit? Not really, but kind of, but also not really. In Film Red, Uta had the creatively named Uta Uta no Mi, or the Sing Sing fruit, which transports people's consciousness into the Uta world, which is kind of a dream world, but also not, because the people caught in it aren't actually asleep. Their consciousness is just elsewhere. It's been separated from their bodies. And in fact, it's kind of the opposite, because Uta had to force herself to stay awake to maintain the Uta world, but she could control pretty much anything in that world as if it was a dream. If Killingham is able to bring seasonings from dreams into reality, then any food made with those can taste amazing and have nutritional value, even the ones from the Cook fruit. That is exactly right. All you need to do is combine both of these fruits and you have the ultimate chef. With Stroisen's devil fruit, you can turn any object you want into horrible tasting food. And then you can use Killingham's fruit to conjure some sort of fantastical seasoning to cover up the fact that you're actually eating a log. Did you notice that flashback Loki was still blindfolded? He certainly was, and that is a big deal for reasons. The two leading ideas thus far for needing to cover Loki's eyes were firstly that it had something to do with the legendary devil fruit that he ate, and that part of his imprisonment was to restrain that ability, whilst the second was that the blindfold was there to prevent Loki from using some sort of highly advanced observation haki. And it's looking like neither of those are correct. Although we do need to remember a thing about the giants. In this flashback, it looks like Loki and Haruden are children, but looks cannot be relied upon to tell us how old a giant is. Meaning that yes, Loki could have this child-looking body, but he could be older than Luffy in this flashback. And so he would have definitely had the years on this planet to develop some sort of amazing observation haki, especially since he was constantly immersed in the infinite battle that is Warland. The age is kind of tripping me out though, because in this flashback, Haruden looks exactly the same as he did in the Big Mom flashback, which took place when he was 18 years old. Which means that Haruden is 18 years older than Loki, because we first heard that Loki was born in that very flashback. So in the flashback in this chapter, Haruden has to be in at least his 20s while this is happening because Loki can't be Zero, and Haruden might even be approaching his 30s here. Back to the bandages though, they could be there purely for aesthetic reasons, like something designed to cover up an undesirable trait of the ancient giants. They may have had a certain evil eye that King Harold would not allow to be seen. King Harold may have been disgusted by them, like how Big Mom always hated looking at Pudding's third eye. And I have seen the suggestion that Loki may have been born blind and that could be it, but he can definitely see because he managed to recognize Shamrock's face as being the same as Shanks's face. And the only other amazing observation haki user we know of who is blind could definitely not see faces, because Fujitora was regretting blinding himself because he wanted to see Luffy's face. So at the moment, I think that being born with some sort of ancient giant eyes is more likely than being born blind. I should say that we have actually seen Loki's eyes before, kind of. When you go back to our first image of Loki, the silhouette proposing to Lola, this man definitely has eyes on full display. But he also has no horns and looks nothing like Loki actually does, which reinforces what Oda said about not originally planning to make an Elbaf arc. Compare Killingham and Foxy's abilities. No. So you're telling me there is a love-coded villain who is torturing children? Sounds like, at minimum, a Sanji fight, if not a Nami-Sanji combo. Yeah, it definitely hits both of their respective triggers. Nami gets very, very invested in causing people pain if they are harming children. Although right now it's difficult to predict how this pans out, because as things stand, Summers is now kind of the main antagonist of Elbaf, unless Shamrock returns or Loki gets healed and tries to enact some sort of Ragnarok. The issue with that is that One Piece is usually a very simple series. The strongest bad guy on the island is the one that Luffy fights because he's the main protagonist. But I do have a lot of trouble seeing a satisfying Luffy versus Saint Summers showdown, because Summers doesn't really feel like a step up from the Five Elder Stars, or Kaido, or Doflamingo, and it still feels like Luffy versus Loki is on the cards. That just seems to be much more right to me at the moment, and I'll need to check with the official translation, but Loki's line in this chapter about Luffy winning this round does also emphasize that a bit, that Loki is eventually planning a round 2 against Luffy, because they have a lot of business to settle with Loki claiming to be the sun god and everything, and having a bad history with Shanks, and yet, sure, the main antagonist of this arc, it may not be Loki, but I still don't think that Summers is our pinnacle here. But here's what I'm hoping doesn't happen, and I think at the moment there's a scary potential that it might. With Killingham's powers, there is a strong temptation to create a hollow main antagonist for Luffy to fight, some sort of impossibly strong nightmare dream being, and I really don't want that to happen, because it's a very One Piece movie kind of solution to cop out by not fighting a real character with personal stakes and motivation, and instead taking on a big CGI spectacle monster. But this route does lend itself to a very boring solution like that, and I can only trust that Oda has a much better plan going forward. I like how Loki says none of you could even lift Ragnir. That confirms the theory of only Loki being able to lift Ragnir, kind of like Mjolnir. Yeah, this line is just begging for someone else to lift it. We now have a Chekhov's Ragnir, an object said to be unliftable, so like someone's got to lift it. Although it might just be because of how big Ragnir is, because every other giant looks puny compared to it. The scale in this chapter, it's probably off and we shouldn't take it too seriously, but in the panel where Loki says this, Ragnir looks like the slab at the top is pretty much the same size as Harudin or any of the other giants. And aside from some sort of Usopp dream ability combination, the only person who I think has the power to become big enough to lift it would be Luffy, which I would love to see. I would be so incredibly keen to watch Luffy wielding Ragnir, although it may also be a Mjolnir style condition where you need to be deemed worthy by Ragnir. In the Bible, briars grew in desolate barren land and often symbolize sin and judgment. They also indicate spiritual departure from and act as a barrier to God. So the symbolism of Saint Summers' abilities are pretty perfect, and it's not just Christianity either. Briars and thorns are this almost culturally universal symbol of negativity and spiritual barrenness, which is kind of perfect for a member of the Holy Knights, as the most spiritually barren part of this planet is definitely the Holy Land of Marijois, and as a Holy Knight, Summers serves as a barrier to this land and its residents. Although in Christianity, Jesus was also given a crown of thorns when he was crucified, which I do think also fits the Summers philosophy to know love is to wound one another, because in the end that was supposed to be an act of love. Love represented in one of the most visceral and brutal ways imaginable. Is it me, or Elbaf so far feels so small? It's not just you, or at the very least, it's just you and me, because I feel the same way. Elbaf is a really tricky island for scale, and I don't think that the art is the issue. The art is brilliant, and I'm always gobsmacked by the scale, but I think the issue is time and pacing. It takes no time at all for anyone to travel anywhere on Elbaf. Like, we've got Luffy at the Walrus School in one chapter, then at the village party the next, then at Castle West in the next chapter, and now suddenly he's all the way down in the underworld. And this really rapid and zippy cutting creates the illusion that Elbaf isn't very big at all, because it takes no time to get anywhere. It's like everything's on a teeny tiny island. So realistically, and I should say that this is not the fun way to do things, but to truly portray this scale, you would need to significantly slow down the pacing between locations in order to make Elbaf actually feel like it's bigger than any other island we visited. Because yes, I do see the scale with my eyes, but I don't feel the scale, if that makes sense. Because we travel across the island just as quickly, if not quicker, than any other island we've been on. And I'll say that this isn't a major issue for me, it's more a bit of meta intrigue, and I'm really not sure if there is a good way to give that scale to Elbaf without making everything feel so unbelievably slow. So you know what? It is what it is. I like that you can see that one kid's actual mum during the panel with all the giants freaking out. All right, this is very important because I am so invested in this side story. One of the nightmares conjured was a kid's mother because that kid saw her as the scariest possible thing that could destroy the world, more so than the sun god Inca. And in this chapter, I believe we do see the mother in question in this panel of all of the giants panicking. She has the same shape and the same sort of hair. And what I would love to see now is this real mother meeting the nightmare mother. And I think the funniest possible thing would be for the real mother to defeat the nightmare mother, and for the real mother to turn out to be even more terrifying than her child imagined. Now, I don't think that's something that's going to get a lot of focus if it does happen. If it did happen, it would be in the background like the rest of this tiny side story so far. But I really like these tiny side quests that Oda's putting into Elbaf for us to keep track of. For something a bit more important that gets overlooked in this chapter, we did have the revelation that Ylva, the giant girl who is currently at the front of Gunko's arrow line, is the great-great-granddaughter of Jarl. In this chapter, this was played for more of a moment of comedy, because drunk Jarl was stammering with his tongue out. But Jarl, he is one of the last remaining great warriors on this island. And I think if it comes down to it, he may 1,000,000% sacrifice himself for Ylva and do exactly what Saint Summers wanted. Because a true warrior of Elbaf isn't afraid of death, and I'm now starting to feel a little bit worried for Jarl, which is a pretty big shift because I've been quite wary of him so far. He's still in that potential traitor territory for me, but if he isn't a traitor, then I do think we're in for a tragic ending regardless. Because I don't think that Oda would create the system of the thorns causing more pain in direct correlation to quantity of love unless we were going to explore that effect, and Jarl has now become one of the main candidates for that. But there are others. There's a certain Colin on this island who has not one, but luckily 2 parents who love him, in theory. And while I don't see Ripley being ripped to pieces, it could be thematically appropriate for Scopper Gaban to take action if Colin gets ensnared, as he is the self-proclaimed missionary of love, and there's probably no one more philosophically suited to combat Saint Summers and show both he, as well as us and readers, the incredible power that is love.